Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man known far and wide as the best Pokemon trainer in the land,
Tim Longo.
You're only briefly known as that in my game.
Right. Yeah, you got to tell the audience what you sent me.
Oh, yes, that's right. So people who watched on the stream actually know this, but I'm going to clip the end of the game. So at the end of the game, you fight the Elite Four, of course, and then you fight the rival, right, which is defaults to being named the opposite color. So for me, it would have defaulted to blue. For Tim, it was red. I renamed mine Tim or Timothy or something like that.
Timothy.
Yeah, Timothy. And at the end, Professor Oak is chiding Timothy and saying how disappointed he is. So I took a quick snapshot of that and sent it off to Tim while I was playing. So,
it's funny. Yeah. It's a funny little tidbit to be able to change the names like that because it really adds that personal flair that I feel like a lot of JRPGs do a better job of than Western RPGs. They're not precious about that stuff.
Yeah, no, they really aren't. I mean, this game you can rename all the Pokemon, right? Exactly. You can individually name every Pokemon that you catch. You can, which is probably part of the reason why they have boxes to save them in, because they probably actually have to separate the memory out to which they're writing them. I only kind of thought about that later.
I thought that was a weird choice. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, but I'm sure that's what that is. It's just that
limitation.
There's a space limitation, although there's no reason that they have to show that to the user, I don't think, right? If they just if you just page down basically and you just kept paging, like you would not need to know. Although there at a certain point there's a limit, right? There's a pure limit of how much memory they have to save that stuff. So you would ultimately run out. But
they needed Brett DeVille in the project, apparently.
Yeah, they really, they didn't have the best brains in programming, period. I mean, come on. Yeah.
The thing that hurts more about that screenshot you sent me is just your rival is a total jerk. So it's like,
yes, right.
It's like, smell you later. It was like, what? You son of a. Yeah, really and he's got his flippy up hair. He's just a punk.
Yep, he totally is.
He's a good villain in a way.
Yeah, no, he's fantastic that way.
This is a very full circle game in many ways, which I didn't know, and in kind of a cool way. Not even is it just physically a full circle game because your last gym is in a gym you saw early in the game you couldn't get into, but also like you start with your rival and you kind of your career and you meet him throughout, and so your careers mirror each other, and then and obviously becomes the final boss too. So it's
I thought that was fantastic.
yeah, definitely cool. It's unfortunate that it's only boys that you can be, but I'm sure they fix that over time.
I would hope so. You never know, but I would hope so. It's not something they're well known for, gender sensitivity.
No, but in my next Pokemon game, whenever that is, hopefully our bonus episode, I do know what I'm going to do for all of my Pokemon names, though, because I didn't change any of them this time. I just left the default because I kind of wanted to remember the original names because I've never played a Pokemon game before. So, can you guess at what my theme will be?
Perversions of my name?
No, that's a good idea though. I'll consider. I'll put that on the list. I'll consider that one. No, I'm going to do
Democratic senators. You're going to do what? I'm sorry.
Metal Gear. All Metal
Gear.
Oh,
of course you are. Yeah.
Bosses and allies. Yeah.
You should do them all. You should do them all backwards. Therefore, if you get an econs, you'll still have econs.
Okay, that's very clever.
Speaking of your team, let's go ahead and get that out of the way. Do you have like what your team?
Yeah, I think I can remember. Oh, actually, no, I did take a screenshot. I forgot. Let me
pull
that up.
All right, you pull that up. I'll do mine. Mm-hmm. I ended with Hard to Get, who was an Articuno, That is a hard to get Pokemon. It's a sort of
legendary.
I forget what the term was. Yeah, I guess legendary maybe. I found that in one of the dungeons. It involved blocking off the water. I guess it was in the Seafoam Islands.
Yep.
And you can go around and you get it. I had to use my Master Ball to get that one because I used several Ultra Balls or whatever, and it wouldn't catch. But I finally caught it. So that was level 58. Pi was there to the end. Pidgeot, who's a 55 normal flying. Articuno was an ice flying. Prince was level 58. Charizard, fire flying. Dux, the Fear Fetched, was still with me. Normal flying. Omanite, level 31. Rock water Pokemon, whose name was Omanite. I got from the fossil.
Oh yeah, I forgot to go back and pick up my fossil. So,
oh no!
So the game allows you to keep playing. So I wonder if I go back and it still be there.
Oh, it'll be there. Yeah, I guarantee it. And then finally Dory. A couple of these Ducks and Dory were there because I needed Surf and Strength and Fly and things like that. Yeah. So those actually, of those two weren't in the combat at all at the end of the game. And the other 4 were, and 3 of them fainted. So I got to the end of the game and I was 1 hit away from all my actual combat Pokemon being taken out. I was 1 hit away in that final battle.
Awesome.
And I had done it straight through. I mean, the chat was in because I streamed this. The chat was just like, I can't believe like I didn't think you'd get past the first one, Lorelei. Because many of mine don't match up well, right? Except and then the ghost. I was Agatha. I was terrified. I made some mistakes, and I had the type chart open. I didn't realize that normal didn't work. I had not lined that up properly or something. So I ran into a number of issues along the way, but I just kept going because I was like, well, I want to see what's next. If I have to start again, then I just want to know what I'm going to have to do, so that I can maybe swap out a Pokemon and have a better match or something like that. So at the end, I was more leaning into the appropriate opposite type or appropriate sort of more effective types, especially in a couple of those end battles with Bruno and Lance. I really leaned into using my water Pokemons. Or Pokemon. I'm told the plural of Pokemon is Pokemon, and I always say Pokemons just to be annoying. But yeah, that's kind of where I was. What was your final grouping?
So really quick before I forget, did you so from your description of your journey at the end there, which we can come back to and talk more detail if you want. Were you not using any items? You just went through when you say they fainted. And you almost were down to 1. Like if they couldn't you have revived those, or had you done that, or were you
I had been doing that through these battles, so I had run down almost all of my items that I had available to me, and I had bought several, but I probably should have bought more, and some things I didn't know what they did, and I didn't know full restore did both status effects and health, and. Yeah, because I was like, oh, that must be the same as full heal or something. Like I didn't really understand some of because the game doesn't really tell you, so you have to kind of try them and see what happens. Or maybe I guess some of these are probably in the manual. So in my case, I was really just trying stuff. I get to that final battle, and I was like, oh, I should probably try. I only have 3. I have 3 of these things left. I guess I should try using those because it's the only It's the only thing I have left. That was kind of where I got to. But I burned through like 3 max revives and a bunch of heals, both full restores and super heals, and elixir I think was for PP. I don't know if I used that or not.
Yeah,
and revives and max revives and things like that to get through it. But I probably used a dozen items to get through the last 5 battles.
Oh yeah, it probably was way more than that. I brought in a lot because I knew I was going to need it based on what I'm about to tell you.
Okay.
Did you ever find a place to buy elixirs? Because I found them in the wild, but
I don't. I think I only had them from finding them.
Yeah, I really could have used those. but that may be by design, to be honest.
I believe it is. Yes, I asked somebody in stream or maybe somebody emailed about it, and they only. Yeah, Ben Zhao emailed it last week. There's the ethers you can't buy, and I think the elixirs the same way.
Yeah, because that's a forcing function for you to level up. To be honest, like if you could replenish that. I thought for a while if you revived a fainted Pokemon that it would reset the PP, but it doesn't. So
no.
So I had Venusaur, which is the top evolution of what you call it,
Bulbasaur.
Bulbasaur, yep. Wigglytuff. Those are my sort of two pillar Pokemon.
And what level are these?
They were both only 49.
Okay.
And it goes down from there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's hence the roughness of this last run. Dodrio, which is the final
the three-headed
three-headed one versus the two. Graveler still there. Butterfree, which I found out is the top evolution of the Caterpie anyway. And then I picked up I think the original form is Dratini, but it ends up being Dragonair, which is a water dragon that I fished out of the safari, which is apparently a rare one. But I needed
I never saw one of those.
Yeah, I needed the surf. I needed someone for surf. So that's why I picked that one up. And also I just wanted a dragon because they have good resistances, but I didn't level it up enough. It was only, so that was 49, 49, 45, 43, 41, and 35. And I use them all for various reasons. And I think I mentioned this last time, but one of the reasons that Wigglytuff is one of my pillar, I actually did this with everybody, but that one in particular because Jigglypuff is a normal and kind of like, other than the Sing, doesn't really have much of an identity, I don't think. So I put a bunch of diverse TMs on him. Mm-hmm. And so he had Blizzard and a psychic one and, a physical one. And so it kind of could be versatile because he didn't end up taking as much damage as others because I guess his type was kind of neutral. You know what I mean? So he can take a hit from a water and a fire and not completely lose all of his life like others would. So that was, I kind of happened into that strategy, but my TM strategy ended up, I don't know. We can go into it more later, but
so are you generally happy with it? I mean, you beat the game with lower level Pokemon than I did.
Yeah, so I actually am. I'm generally happy with that, and I actually really, really enjoyed doing it that way. And it really added, I think, an unexpected level of strategy, and because what ended up happening in this, especially in the final four, is I'm bouncing through all of them throughout every battle because they all are like these Frankenstein monster versions, Frankenstein's monster version of themselves. And for instance, Butterfree ended up becoming essentially, and I know we talked about this last time, but I know that strategically you're supposed to put TMs on the type that they are of,
right.
That's the powerful
same
way.
Type attack bonus. Yep.
But I decided to just throw that out and see what would happen. And if you're high enough level, that doesn't seem to matter. You still can one shot hit even if your TM is not the same type as the Pokemon. But like Butterfree, as I mentioned before, I think ended up just essentially being a psychic Pokemon because all of the abilities I gave him was psychic, and so really good against bats and a bunch of things, and one-shotting stuff. So it was really fun to feel clever about that. Some of the mistakes I made, though, to give you an example, which it's going to come back up in one of my key sort of takeaways. I would make mistakes like putting certain TMs that I didn't kind of do the rock, paper, scissors math on. So for Graveler, I gave Graveler a fire attack TM that was very powerful. It's like Flame Burst or something. But the irony of that is water is very good against Graveler because he's a rock type.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so I would bring... Yeah. I would bring him out to attack a water Pokemon, but of course that water Pokemon can completely obliterate. So he wouldn't even get his fire attack out, right? So I didn't choose wisely in some cases the type of TM I put on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense, right? Yeah. You're so weak to the things you're strong against that you're in trouble. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Yep. So unless you get a lucky first hit, it ends up not being efficient. And I just didn't think that through, and would have, but it's kind of cool to me that is a thing.
Is something
to think about. So I think my only real main mistake with my strategy was that I'm actually surprised about how high all of yours are. And I want to ask you about that because I played pretty linearly. I didn't do a lot of collection in the grass and stuff, so I didn't grind that way. And even the last gym with Giovanni, I didn't have much trouble with, but I didn't get up into the high 50s by just playing normally. Did you grind at all? Because I should have been basically 10 levels higher for all of my Pokemon than I was to make it easier on myself, but I didn't have the time to do that.
Okay, so I think that the things that I did, there were a couple other Pokemon that are probably in that sort of 30 area that are stored because I stored them at some point. The Articuno, the legendary, I think started at level 50.
Yeah.
So that was already one of the highest level things I had when I got it. Pi and Prince, the Pidgeot and the Charizard, were just sort of my mains that I just always went to. So it'd be I'd level something else. So my strategy was basically put something weaker in slot 1.
Mm-hmm.
So something that's 20 levels or lower than sort of my two mains, and then just swap it out in the first turn every time.
Mm-hmm.
And swap back to them. And I just did that pretty consistently. And I'd go to Pidgeot or to Prince, the Charizard, just basically all the time. And so they just were constantly getting, even though, well, they were just the mains. They were just, I would go to them constantly. Yeah. And then I just use them as the framework to level other things to be sort of good, not awesome, but good. And like I said, I probably had some that were in the 30s that got dropped out at one point or another, or high 20s or what have you. I know that the I forget what it was called, but the one that started as a Weedle and then went to a Kakuna and then something beyond that, I think that one was the poison bug type. That one I think got pretty high. I had that for a long time because it had cut on it, but then I didn't need it at the end, and I wanted to have some of the other things that I ended up with. I needed the swimmer, which was Dory, the Lapras, and I wanted the flying in case I needed to fly back and buy stuff. I didn't know what I was going to come up to at the end. I wanted to have that fly so I could get back and forth pretty quickly, and that's what was on that. So that's really why that happened, is that I was always just switching to those, and they were always getting half the XP. And I just kind of went back and forth between the two of them. And I fought basically every trainer. There's probably a handful I didn't as I got towards the end, where I just skipped some of the swimming ones. But generally speaking, I would actually go back and pick up all the trainers and make sure I got all that money. I ended with I bought a bunch of stuff, but I ended with 120,000 Pokebucks or something like that as well. So,
I was up that high, but I right before the Final Four, I spent most of it on just stocking up on stuff because I figured I was going to need it. Yeah, that makes sense. That approach makes sense because basically, I kept the strategy I talked about last time, where I was basically leveling them all fairly evenly. And so I would bounce around. And so I was managing 6 and you were kind of managing
really 3 at any given time.
So, seeing that XP would basically go into that same amount of XP, because I didn't skip any trainers either. But that amount of XP going into half as many, right? I can see how that difference would be in there without having to grind. So, but to your question, sort of did I, was it worth it or whatever? That final battle, and sort of I guess I will kind of call it the puzzle aspect of some of those, because I had this weird strategy where certain abilities were on different ones and unexpected ones, so I really had a lot of like trial and error and like trying some stuff out, because it wasn't like I could rely on, the fire Pokemon has all the fire,
right.
fire abilities. Right. And in fact, Jigglypuff being, like this Renaissance man of abilities and kind of like what's that the Skrull or something from Fantastic Four or whatever, that has all the different elemental in one. But anyway, yeah, it was really kind of gratifying to finish, but I did save in between each one, and I probably blacked out maybe 2 or 3 times throughout the fight. I was relatively happy with the final battle with my nemesis though, because some of those I got one shots on, even though, and it is very gratifying to one shot like 50 and 60 level.
Yeah, it sure is.
With like a 40 level.
Yeah.
So I did feel clever about that, but I got one shotted myself plenty too. So I used a lot of ability or a lot of items. So
yeah, no, I was using Articuno a lot for the dragon boss Lance. Also for the fire boss, I might have used Omanite a lot, which was my rock and water. And
that's good. Yeah, rock and water. That's good.
And I was just sort of with those, it was like hot knife through butter. I just was going through those bosses so fast compared to Lorelei and Agatha, where I was just getting crushed. But then I was getting to the end and a lot of things had fainted. I was out of revives. I had maybe one left. I mean, it was just nerve-wracking to go and be like, oh no, I have to fight again. Like I was like, ooh, I won. I like, he can on the stream, I'm like, I put my hands up over my head and then I played the cutscene. I was like, oh no, and my hands come down. Like, oh, I didn't know this was gonna happen. So it was
yeah, I mean,
it was a really good, because you had fought him again right on the way out there. So it's just sort of like, I guess I wasn't expecting that, especially because I mean, he's always taunting you and how he's so great and everything like that, but then of course you always beat him. So it's like, well, how great are you really? I mean, you're a punk.
How did you get past all
exactly? How'd you get? No way you got past all of those with your Pokemon. So,
yeah, that was a surprise. And I had many of the same. Yeah, I think Lorelei was probably the hardest for me. My problem ended up also being, and I think if you think about the design work here, it's because of the level disparity that I had. And not having the perfect damage type for Pokemon type in all cases. PP ended up being my problem because I was so much lower in level. In some cases, even though I was doing the right damage type, it wasn't doing as much damage as it could. So I was having to hit them more times. Even though they may not be able to hit me much. So then, therefore, I'm using more PP, right? And so the reason I took a picture of one of a couple of, because like multiple Pokemon on the last battle. I mean, I was telling Brett this in pre-show, but this ending of this game is going to be one of the most memorable endings of a game I've had in a while, including all of the podcast games we've played. And it's because it was so intense and it was so harrowing just at multiple moments. And not only was everyone almost fainted and revived multiple times, but like everybody was almost out of PP as well. And in that last battle with Red, like I was using like whatever, I was sleeping people just to give me enough time to use potions. And then, like I was pulling out every trick in the book that I could, and it became this weird dance of like menu diving.
What can I do
and
now?
I was it was because I was running out of options, and it was just down to like nail biting, like you said, down to the wire. And I have never felt so stressed. Because and some of it is I wanted to finish, right? And this was like 1:30 last night, so I wanted to finish. So I was kind of stressed that I didn't want to quit, but also it was just kind of fun to go through it, and the culmination of all this time and energy put into these Pokemon, and then to be so under leveled as well, and to feel like I have to be clever to win. I can't actually brute force my way through this because I'm just not leveled right. So
Yeah, no, it really pays off that way. I mean, I think the other game that I felt really empowered by finishing was Ultima Underworld, because there was so much to that game. I just remember at the end of that being just like, wow, I can't believe I beat this game.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, there's that, and you know, a lot of the other games we've played have been more traditional, or have not been. I don't know, that the challenges have been different, and it's been more moment to moment challenges sometimes than it has been sort of like the big ending or what have you. But the culmination of some of these games is just overwhelming. But this one, I agree with you, because you've got this structure where you come into this long grind out 5, you know, whatever that turns out to be, like 25 or 30 Pokemon chain is kind of extraordinary to get through that. And I couldn't believe it. I never thought, after going, I mean, I was just pushing through to see how far I could get so I'd have information about how to reform my Pokemon party. Because I was like, well, I'm clearly not going to make this on the first try. So let me just see and find out what they all are as far as I can go. And then I'll try to pick the bottom 3 to be helpful, you know, however they can be. But to actually have pushed all the way through and gotten through it was amazing. I mean, it was that definite sense of Fiero that we've talked about before, of just like, oh, I beat the challenge. Man, I beat the challenge. I can't believe it. So totally great.
Well, and I kind of I did the same approach, even though I was time crunched. So I didn't really, like, if I hadn't had a makeup that was even possible, then I probably wouldn't have finished, right? Because I just wouldn't have had time to reform and play again or whatever.
Right.
So that's why I was kind of saving as I went, which was also a risk because I'm saving in the middle of this sequence. But to your point, like, with each one you take down, especially if you get some one-shot kills and stuff, you know, that adrenaline goes up a little bit, right? And then you get to like to Agatha, which is like the third one, and you're like, and you're about to finish her off. You're close. You're like, man, maybe I can make this, you know. And then the next battle gets even more intense because you're like, oh, I'm so close. I hope I can do this, you know. And I'm running out of PP left and right on these critical abilities that I've put in there, and then some of them are really low PP. So it's I think we either had an email or over Twitter, somebody mentioned, you know, to be careful of that, which I didn't listen to in every instance. It just, like, the tension would build, you know, it's like, it's almost like a series of whatever, 20 bosses in a row or something, you know?
Well, it's the end of a JRPG, right? You've been through this before, so...
That's a really good point. That gosh darn game. Oh man, I couldn't believe the end of Final Fantasy IX. How many bosses? It crushed me, as we know, right?
But here you do. I mean, on the one hand, you sort of know that this is coming, right? Because they talk about it the whole game. Oh, you have to fight the Elite Four, and they're very clear when you go in, like, oh no, you're gonna have to do these 4 in a row, and if you fail at any point, you come back to the beginning. So they're very clear. The only surprise really is the rival. So,
that's true. They definitely lead you into it, and that's a good point. I think the only thing that I feel like is I don't know. I feel like the level disparity between the last gym and those is a little higher than it was for others. I feel like each of the gyms before throughout the game was kind of going up by like maybe 5 level increments, but this was like going up by 10 to 15 levels between, you know, from the last gym. So it's sort of like they were maybe forcing you to grind because you didn't really have any trainers left to get. So I felt a little like, not cheated, but, you know, felt like a little forced in that regard. But because of the depth of the systems and the speccing you can do, I feel extremely gratified that I was able to actually finish, you know, even with saves coming a little bit, I still had to finish, right? Even if I saved. So, and because, you know, systemically, physically, you couldn't, even if you were saving, like, cause you can run out of PP, you can run out of items and everything. So I did ultimately
I'm pretty
win,
sure I was on my last attack as well, like my last available attack. I had a couple other unfainted Pokemon or whatever, but they were going to be one hit kills. So I was like, well, I got to do it with this one because the other ones just aren't going to do it.
It's so cool.
Yeah, it's pretty great because even just swapping in, right, they're gonna get a free attack. So it's like, oh,
yep, that's not going to work.
Yeah. So I was, because they were low, they were 20 levels lower or whatever, at least. I think there were some 60s in those final couple battles. So I was like, oh, I'm going to be in real trouble if I can't keep my 350s up. So yeah. But yeah, great.
The drama.
Yeah.
It's just I'm just all in now.
Yeah.
Like
you're a Pokemaniac. You're one of those bosses that's a Pokemaniac.
Yeah, and I don't know what that means exactly, like how far I'm going to go, but I am excited to play more at some point when in all of my oodles of time, which will not happen. But I'm just really, delighted and surprised and kind of feel bad that I've put it in. We've talked about this in previous episodes, but for whatever reason, I put it in this bucket, of a kind of thing that it really. I don't think I gave it enough credit, and I'm obviously happy to be proven wrong, and just impressed, because the design work alone, which is obviously something that I'm focusing on the most when I'm playing and kind of assessing, is just the balancing of this game is a nightmare and just crazy, and just and not to jump to some of my takeaways, but the depth is just incredible. So really, especially on this system, which in a weird way, I really enjoyed going back to that as well. Just playing
a game
black and white for me, and just like the simplicity of it, in an age when games are so freaking complex. So,
I mean, don't sell it short. It's really 4-color grayscale.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, good point.
I mean, you got 2 extra grays there, man.
Right. Is it only 4?
It's 4-color, yeah.
Is it just 4?
Yeah, it's 2-bit, 2-bit pixels. And in fact, the sprites are actually, 1 color is transparency. So it's really only 3 colors for a sprite, although you can pick which 3. White, light gray, dark gray, and black. You can choose those however you want, and then you have to make the 4th color transparency. It's super wild.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Although in this case, actually, because the backgrounds are white, they can use white as transparency and just get white, right? So because the battle screen is white, right? So they can just use white as a color because it's going to be transparent to white. So they actually get to use all 4 colors because of their nice little trick to be able to make those larger sprites and use 4 colors. Apparently use 4 colors in them, but what they're really doing is using 3 colors, and then the white comes from the background. It's insane. It's amazing to me.
Those days of it is. I mean, the craftsmanship of squeezing every little bit out of a turnip kind of thing, and out of a cart or out of a console. And I just feel like it's a lost art.
I mean,
to some degree, we're still doing that to some degree. It's just changed so much,
right.
With, and I'm not just saying, like, with every system you have limitations. It's like everyone's always like, oh, the new system's coming out. Well, unlimited memory. It's like, no, that's not a thing.
Yeah, no.
Like, you will always use your memory, but it's just arithmetically blown up in such a way, or whatever the right term is. You math folks will tell me. It's just blown up to where it's not like as pure as this example is of the Game Boy, where it's just like you're talking about, the decision to save that transparency because the background's white.
Right.
It's like that's what artists had to think about, and that's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, they were pretty far. You got to remember they're 6 years or something into the Game Boy cycle at this point. So I mean, I think that at this point, when we were getting pretty late in the PS2 cycle, I mean, the same sorts of, I mean, we've talked about this before. We played God of War or whatever, which is very late.
Metal Gear.
Or Metal Gear in the original PlayStation. You play those games that are really, really late in the cycle, and they're really squeezing everything that you can out of it. And I think they got a lot out of the Game Boy. Although the Game Boy went until 2003, which is insane to me. Though the Game Boy Advance came out in 2001, so those last couple of years were really just kind of squeezing what they could get out of the market and selling out the remaining inventory and things like that. But so it had a couple of years where it just was kind of dying off. Anyway, let's hit a couple other quick topics before we turn to our takeaways. We've already kind of touched on one of mine anyway, but one of them was the sort of dungeons, the last couple of dungeons, and how they were a lot more puzzly. The first couple of dungeons were really just mazes, and mazes aren't really puzzles. They're solvable easily. They're annoying in that case because you're getting attacked every few steps, but you just put your left hand on the wall or whatever and you find your way. But these were actually genuine, like, oh, you have to have an ability, first of all, which I didn't have when I first went into the Seafoam Islands dungeon. You have to have that strength ability to move the boulders around. And then on the other hand, you have to go and sort of connect the map. That was the only one I actually had to literally draw a map for while I was playing, and like write letters like, okay, this goes to this is letter G, it goes to this other letter G, which is this other diagram I've drawn on the next page of my notebook or what have you. Although that said, totally loved it. I mean, except for the random battles that kind of are constantly pressuring you, which you can use a repel to avoid, which I never did. That aside, I really like that. So I don't know where you were on that.
Yeah, I know. No, it was a nice. My dungeon's point, and you covered the puzzles part of it well. It was kind of a nice, kind of delightful surprise, and yet another one for me. My other dungeon's point that I wanted to kind of make was in the surprise category, was just the fact that I guess that they were so prominent in the game in general. You know, in many cases they were linearly, you had to go through them, and so they used them as a sort of palate cleanser and sort of force you into the quote unquote grass, right? Because they're going to also be attacking. So there's some tuning and balancing decisions there that would impact the way that you would level through the game by doing that. But also, like, I kind of appreciated and would never have seen things coming, like one of the dungeons is a tower devoted to the ghosts of Pokemon, right, yeah. You know, and one dungeon is an office building, right, you know, right. And one dungeon is an abandoned mansion, you know, and they were very creative with their dungeon types, you know, versus like, oh, they're all caves or they're all, you know, and in fact, we didn't mention it last time, but it wasn't a dungeon, but you find the developers building.
Yeah.
Like you go to, and you know, and that's like just a great little fun thing for them to add in there. But so not a dungeon, but I just was like the diversity of locales and the creativity that they had with what dungeons became for them. I think I'm even forgetting another one that I thought was hilarious. Was a dungeon. I mean, in a way, Safari Zone is also a dungeon too, right?
So it's a puzzle for sure.
So a puzzle, and then they added in that extra mechanic of time or steps, if you will, and so I was just another kind of like this. A lot of my topics for this series has been surprises, you know, and things I just didn't think were in the game. And so that was kind of cool. And then, you know, of course, Victory Road at the end and such. But just the diversity and role that dungeons played. I thought it was just kind of like I'm roaming around the overworld in grass the whole time,
right?
You know,
right.
And again, not a fair assessment, but it was kind of a nice switch up.
Yeah, and I mean, this is your, I don't know, second JRPG, I guess. I don't know.
I think officially that's easily
a second and a half, maybe, if you count Anachronox, because it has a lot of the flavor, even if it's not really. And you know, I'm kind of curious, how many more do you want to play?
Well, they are growing on me. I think it's going to be hard to ever convince me that the grinding is something that I will want to do. And I know that I know the hypocrisy of that when I say that because I play WoW. So I know. Don't send me a mail on that. But for whatever reason, I think the random encounter part of that changes it for me.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm interested in Pokemon Let's Go, because I want to see how that kind of mentally, if there's a mental shift for me, because they don't do you can see the Pokemon wandering. I don't know if you knew that.
I did know that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which is more like whatever Pokemon Go and stuff. So kind of interesting to see the psychological change for me on that. But the structure of the JRPGs is definitely, I mean, I think I even mentioned it after Final Fantasy IX that I'm the one that keeps bringing up that we should play Chrono Trigger.
I know. One of these days we're going to have to get to that too.
So many people tell me to play that. And we've talked about some others that I've always been intrigued by. And so, so I will say I've shifted toward looking forward to them rather than loathing that we're going to play them. So maybe that's a good shift.
That's a great shift. That makes me happy. Yeah. It makes me happy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all your fault.
It is. And and of course we're playing another one next. So, or at least that's what we talked about. So I guess we still have time to change our mind, but because we're going to do a bonus Let's Go episode. So for folks who are kind of curious, I'm super curious to see how that changes the game and how that game feels, especially since it's basically Pokemon Red, Blue, structure-wise, and then with the Let's Go mechanics changes, including that sort of random battling and seeing what you're going to fight. That's super interesting to me. So I look forward to checking that out. Yeah. Any other random topics you want to tackle before we do takeaways?
Just some quick ones that can be very quick. One, I wanted to mention the trainers, strewn about throughout the world. And as a mini kind of takeaway on that I really appreciated that some of them you could skip, but often they were put in a way where they were going to nab you based on the positioning of them, and I even like the little touch of you can see where they're facing. And so you can decide, sometimes whether to trigger them, but some of them you just weren't going to get past. But it was a good way for them to essentially, without you realizing it, testing out your crew to see how you're doing as you go, because they doled them out level based, because the game is largely linear. They could tell, well, by this point you should be around this level, so we're going to put trainers at this level so you're ready. Because what the sort of dark horse, in my opinion, and I'm sure they did this on purpose, I don't, this would have had to have been designed, they don't want people to get to the gym, trainers, and be in such bad shape that you're losing all the time, especially I would think kids who maybe aren't fully grokking everything. And so this was a way for them to sort of, stress test you along the way and say, hey, by this zone, you should be around 20 something. So the trainers are going to be around there. So, not all of them will be mandatory, but some of them are going to trip you up and you better be ready. And so if you're not, then that, it kind of just gives you this automated sort of, keeping you honest on your leveling up. And also it just levels you up. Right. So I just thought that was a nice little design choice. And then the other quick one that I mentioned a little bit earlier.
Just to poke into that just for a second too. The other nice thing about the trainers and how that balances is you also have the opportunity at that point to go back, right? Because they've been forced on you in the sense that they face. Once you've passed them, you can just pass back to go back to go and recover at a Poke Center, for example, or save your game, or even just grind if you, for whatever reason, have messed up somehow. Maybe you traded something you shouldn't have, or what have you, and so you have that actual opportunity as well. Most JRPGs have some ability to grind, whether or not you want to. It's kind of always been a balancing factor in JRPGs of just like, oh, you know what? That's what the random battles are there for. You're having trouble, just go level. Just go level up whatever. Your characters, in this case, your Pokemon. So they still have that here.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think the interesting thing I guess maybe another thing that is just dawning on me as you're saying that, and why I'm bringing the trainers up, is I actually didn't do a lot of grinding in this game. Yeah. But I did fight every trainer that I found. So I felt like it was kind of helping me. It's kind of like auto grinding in a way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was, I feel like as compared to say Final Fantasy IX, where there were some bosses where I got to them and I wasn't supposed to be there yet, but it was the next linear step. Mm-hmm. And so it was kind of forcing me to go back here. As long as I didn't skip trainers, I was kind of on the straight and narrow, you know?
Right. Yeah, and no, that's a good point.
I don't know if I'd call it an innovation on the JRPG grind, but I feel like it is something interesting to mention.
Yeah. No, you're very right.
Yeah, and it was a good little tidbit. They were binary. That once you beat them, then they wouldn't fight you again. So you kind of knew where you go backwards, and you knew where you've been. The other small one is just the map itself. And I think you mentioned that you didn't pick up the original map, so you didn't have it with you the whole time. But I don't know if you went back to get it. But
I never did. No, I just used the maps in houses and stuff. Yeah,
the thing that I liked about it though is that it is kind of a little rare for RPGs in general. Is that there's no fog of war or anything, so you see the whole game essentially. And in fact, when you cycle through the locations on the map, you see where everything. In fact, you see via the cycling the order that you're going to go in.
Yeah,
and so it's very in your face.
With a couple exceptions, like the islands, I don't think you see or whatever. But yeah.
Well, but your cursor goes through the islands. You know what I mean?
Okay, so
yeah, you know when you're going to get to the islands.
Yeah, sure.
By the order, and in fact, like when you go from like the SS Anne or to when the power plant. Oh, that was the dungeon. I forgot the power plant. When the power plant opens up, it's actually a spot on the map, and it doesn't cycle to that power plant until it is available to you in the game. You know what I mean? So it's essentially you can map out your journey, and it ends up being a full circle. And so I don't know. I thought it was kind of a nice, bold kind of decision to just put it all out there, and you kind of can see your progress as you go. So it was almost like you see, it's like a percentage meter or something, right? You're like, well, I'm here, and this is the map says that there's these many more points left, and you're going to end on Indigo Plateau or whatever. So I don't know. I just appreciated it for some reason in this game. So
I don't think I even went to the power plant.
No, so I didn't actually go, but it is on the map.
It does show up on the map. I remember it showing up on the map, and I was like, did I?
You have to go back.
Did I actually go there? But you do have to go from a particular town or something. You have to walk to it, right?
Yeah. You have to go back to. It's not.
That's
Saffron.
Where you get the electric types. But yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's where you have to go back. You have to get you only can go back once you get surf because you have to swim.
Okay.
Swim down a river.
That would be why I didn't do it. Okay, I didn't. Yeah. Okay.
There's three. Which you may know. There's three. I did look some of this up afterwards because I was curious about what Pokemon I missed. But I guess there's three legendaries, and they're all birds. And one is in the power plant. One is in Seafoam Islands, and one is in.
That's the one I got. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and they're usually associated with like a puzzle, like you said.
Okay.
So
interesting.
And they're all 50. They're all level 50, I think, and they're all three different types.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there's one that only I could get in the power plant as well. I'm looking it up right now. Interesting. Oh yeah, Zapdos is the one that you're talking about. That is the level 50. But there's Electabuzz, which only I can get. Apparently, it's only in red that you can get.
Oh, I never looked that up. Yeah, which one was per version?
Yeah, I mean, you might be able to get that somewhere else. I don't know, but in this, you can't get it. Elsewhere. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, I
may not have that entirely right, but I'm looking at a Wikipedia page. Maybe there's somewhere else in the world that you can get it, but at least in there, that's you can only get it in there in red. So that's interesting too. Yeah, that's those things. Yep, it's a whole thing. All right. We are like 45 minutes in or so, so let's take a quick break and then we'll come back with our takeaways.
Okay.
welcome back from the break. Of course, here we are at the end of a series, which is when we like to do some sort of takeaways and lessons learned and the things that really particularly struck us about a particular game that we've played. Normally, I let you go first, so I'm going to let you go first.
You mix it up on me. Yeah, actually, my first topic that I wanted to mention as a takeaway that I think needs to be mentioned, but neither of us really dealt with much, and that is the depth of sort of collection that they've put in the game that I think is one of the special sauce parts of the formula, because there were definitely some moments where either I saw some Pokemon and I didn't catch them because I wasn't doing that and I just moved on, or heard about one, or like somebody wanted to trade me for one for a name I had never heard, and so the sort of like that little thing in the back of my neck, that because I am a collector, the hairs on my neck perked up, and I was like, oh man, I could really sink myself into this thing,
Yeah, there's another 106 or something I haven't found or whatever. Yeah.
And I ended up probably ultimately capturing about 40, I think.
Yeah, I was at 44.
Yeah, so I didn't, and that wasn't really even trying. But I think as a takeaway of sort of like it's as an emphasis, and obviously we joked about the tagline of got to collect them all or whatever. And so that's a thing. But I guess I just hadn't anticipated that being as deep as it was. I knew the number roughly from people telling me that, but the diversity and sort of the cool aspect and the fact that evolution is a part of the collecting, which I didn't know, that you can evolve through one and that's considered that you've collected it. And then the other thing that I think an NPC tells you that I didn't realize that maybe you knew from that NPC, or you already knew, every Pokemon that appears or you collect is unique. So, but from a stats perspective, so if you collect 5 Pikachu, they're all different, and you can spec them differently, and obviously you can spec them differently, but so it's just like that is just crazy to me. Like the sort of quote unquote loot table of all that is really just cool and astounding. So I just wanted to make sure that was one of my takeaways, because we didn't really delve into it too much.
Yeah, no, we didn't, mostly because of how we're playing, the amount of time we had to that. And there is kind of a whole separate aspect of the game in terms of battling other players, and like we touched on the sort of tournament stuff just kind of very briefly at one point. And that ties into all that stuff, like finding that trading, perfect whatever, and it like, oh, it started with really good stats, and I'm going to evolve it when I'm going to evolve it, and I mean, just all of that stuff gets to be very. There's a surprising amount of depth in all of that. We did talk about the sort of other things that they've done with that as well, with the shiny things and what have you.
Oh, right.
As something that came in later and continues to this day, apparently. So for me, the first, and this people will know right off the bat what I'm going to pick, but it's designing to your technical constraints.
Yeah.
When I went and looked up that hardware and went, oh my God, just like, oh, this is how they made these games. I just was astonished. And I feel like I didn't call him out at the time, because I think this is, the more I read about the music, how you program music on this thing. Junichi Masuda is the composer of this, and ultimately, if I'm not mistaken, it went on to be sort of the sort of producer, sort of head dude.
I think he's pretty. Yeah, he became. Pretty high
he was doing both the composition and the programming, some programming, I believe, on this game, and then ultimately became sort of the project leader. Anyway, the music's fantastic. He also was working within constraints. Anybody who was working on the Game Boy was, and I don't know if this late in the hardware cycle they had better tools and things like that for composition. I'm sure they did, But yeah, I mean, working within some severe technical constraints and finding a way to really maximize what you get out of the hardware as a result. It's as a programmer, it's always special to me. We have a feedback question about this that we'll get to in a few minutes, but this one is one of those where the constraints are so severe, right? In a way, this is probably the most severe constraints of any game we've played. This is a 4 megahertz machine, I think. Is that right? And it's got no memory. it's got I forget exactly, like 40K of addressable memory that it uses for programs, and then the other remaining 24 or whatever must be for peripherals to communicate with them, and then the memory bank control. I mean, just like all of it is astonishing to me, and I've never really had to program professionally under constraints anywhere near that severe, it just reminds me that you can do a lot of really special things even in a really constrained environment.
Yeah.
So that's a thing that really hits me.
That's awesome. That's a good one for sure. My next one is a pretty obvious one, but needs to be sort of recorded, if you will, and that is the sort of depth and meta of their rock paper scissors system, and really how much because it's always been known as that, and in fact I never knew this, but they even reference it in the manual that it's a rock paper scissors system.
Yeah.
And that's how everyone always has described the design, and obviously they're not the only ones that have done this, but the depth and meta that comes from it, especially when, like the weird way that I played, you add in the technical machines as well, with each their own damage types and different variables, it's just astounding to me. Like, as a design, tuning, and balancing challenge, which I already mentioned, it's like crazy, especially as Brett was just saying, on a system like this, and it's kind of mind blowing, and you can kind of see why people would have lost their their minds and their lives to a game like this, right? Because I felt it right after finishing the final 4 and finishing the game, which luckily you start once the credits roll, you go back and you're still playing, right? So you can just keep going now that you've finished, and you can go keep collecting and stuff. And I had that tinge at the end of, like, even though it was 1:30 in the morning, I was like, oh yeah, I want to just go out and start mastering this thing, because there's so much more I didn't even touch, and I kind of clumsily finished the game, but I bet I could really master this thing and figure out all the different combinations and the evolutions and just the whole system. Though rock, paper, scissors is a simple concept, they've really, like, outdone themselves when it comes to how they put all of put that matrix together. So yeah, that's a big one for me.
Yeah, and mine, I guess, is sort of tied to that, and it's the flexibility, right? I mean, both you and I had very different approaches to how we played this game.
Yeah, that's a great one.
And for me to have that, especially considering how wide an audience this ultimately hits, and it ends up tying into a lot of player types. It plays into players who love to work the systems super hard. It plays into the people who are just like, I want to just grind and find all the Pokemon and just fight Pokemon all day long, and it's just going to level them up and they'll be fine. So I mean, basically that's you and me, the two types that we played, because I was just over leveled, as I said, for most of my battles. But that also allows for different player goals. So if you've got somebody who's totally into, like, you can imagine playing this again after you've played through it once and being like, I'm going to try to do it. I'm going to try to get this thing so that I can make sure I can tackle these trainers super early and whatever, and try to get through it. Like, what is the minimum level I can get through with my Pokemon at the end when I fight the Elite Four or whatever, and things like that. So you allow, because you have such flexibility in the systems, and the approaches that you can take with the game, you allow for a lot of different types of player expression, that cover a lot of different types of fun. And I think that's why this game really resonates so well with so many people. I mean, this is one of those games that people were so excited that we were going to play, because it connects with so many people, because there's so many different ways it can connect. And it's really that flexibility that I think is really astonishing. And again, in something that's, you would think, so limited, but it really has just a huge amount of approachability from that standpoint. And it lets anyone from 8 to 88 play. So
Yeah, no, that's a great point. As a mini tag on to that point, on that takeaway, that the reason I kept bringing up Jigglypuff or Wigglytuff as he turned out to be,
or V,
or yeah, V. Okay, that's good. All right, that's what I'm going to name him next time. Is it kind of, and he ended up becoming this kind of emergent story for me because of the flexibility you're talking about, because I turned him into this thing, this bard, if you will, of being able to do various things, and so in my head I had this headcanon of sort of like his journey through his life, where he's picking up these talents and becoming this jack of all trades, and that flexibility was the only way that could have happened, so I'm like, I'm speccing him in a way that who knows what percentage of people spect, right? Like maybe nobody, I don't know, it's like, why did I don't even know why I chose Jigglypuff to do it with, I just thought it was kind of funny, that why does he have Blizzard and, Mega Drain, and, it's like just these weird things or whatever. So, it wasn't Mega Drain, it was Mega Kick, if I'm honest. But, so anyway, that's the flexibility point's a really good one. My last big one, and I have kind of like a mini bonus one that'll be quick, but my last big one is kind of a bit of a segue to on what we were just talking about, but kind of it's on the aesthetic side of the Pokemon themselves, which because I'd never played a Pokemon game and I'd never gone this deep, and even though I only caught about 40 or so, I ended up seeing over 100 or whatever by fighting them or through the trainer battles, and there are some crazy freaking Pokemon out there, and the diversity of them and just the wackiness and the aesthetics of some of them and the theming with the trainers. The other sub point I forgot to mention in the trainer topic is, they would partner the type of the Pokemon types with the trainer type. So like if you were fighting a swimmer,
the swimmers water types or whatever.
So it was kind of teaching you that, right, through those themes. But just, they're just crazy. They're crazy and zany and innovative and fun. And just every time the new one came up, I was like, what, that I would never have seen coming. So maybe it's just a cultural difference, and this, these are themes that because Miyazaki has a lot of some similar cool creatures in the stuff that Studio Ghibli does, but not to this extreme. Like they just had complete fun with these things and went to the hilt with them. And I thought it was just so fun to just see, as somebody who's discovering the franchise for the first time, to see what the next crazy thing was going to be. So
no, that's a good point. I mean, my other takeaways are things that you've covered, so I don't have another one to go. I mean, the rock paper scissors design was the other thing that I specifically was like, oh yeah, but also collection, right? So are both things that I think that are super important. And so I just want to echo them and say, yeah, those are also huge things for me. I mean, I think that I'm a person who likes to collect anyway, generally in games. So that's not, that didn't need to be any deeper for me to be sort of interested in it. But the fact that it's deeper, right? That the collection mechanic, as you pointed out in the first episode, was like, oh, but that's how you grow your party, right? That's how you expose yourself to new abilities and everything. That's again a sort of flexibility around the collection. Also amazing. So there's a lot to it.
You're collecting gameplay depth, right? Like you're not just collecting an audio log or a trinket or something. You're collecting like gameplay, like deep gameplay, and that's just astounding to me. And then the other just stroke of brilliance I'll give them the credit for, is the JRPG grind is wrapped into the collection, because you choose when you go into the grass, which will create that random encounter, but you want to do that because you want to open the loot box of which one is it going to be.
Yeah, what am I going to
so it's like
here? Yeah.
Oh my god, it's just so it's something else. I'm just flabbergasted.
Yeah,
So.
no, really, really wonderful. You said you had another sort of small thing.
Oh, the only mini one that I mentioned multiple times, but just to put a pin in it for finally, just that I just hadn't realized how much of an RPG this was.
Oh yeah,
an actual RPG, with sort of a story and a flow and locations and characters and villains and it's actually it has the structure of an RPG. So that was just not a takeaway as much as just kind of under the summary of a surprise that I was nice. It was nice to see. So that's it.
Yep. I don't know if you did this, but at the end, I made sure I went and talked to every person along the way so that they would say, "Oh, you can't get past me without the such and such badge," and they'd be like, "Oh, but I see you have it." I'd be like, "That's right, I have all the badges." I just made sure I found every person, so every single one of them would say to me, "You can't get past me without a, oh, you have it, you're good."
Yeah, right.
I love that. I love that kind of moment of just like, oh yeah, it's repeating back to me all the things that I've done. Here are the 8 things. Here are the 8 things I did. So
yeah, good reinforcement. Yeah,
it was really fun that way. Okay, well that's the end of our Pokemon Red Blue discussion. What a game!
Yeah,
I'm sure you're going to be taking that on vacation every now and again to see if you can.
I'd like to return to it. Yeah.
No, I agree. Terrific game. I still have a GBA, so I could actually take it on the go anytime I want as well. So.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Good call.
I just pop it into that. Anyway, we are going to just read a couple of so Tim can catch his ferry and all that stuff. We're just going to read a couple of emails. Next week, we're going to return to Pokemon and look at Pokemon Let's Go. And we don't have to play as far as you want, Tim. I'm not going to put a number on it. I'm going to play probably one whole 5 or 6 hour session or something like that over the weekend on my stream at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. And people can join me for that. I don't know if I'll play 2. We'll see where I am and how much more I want to see of it at that point, or if I feel like, okay, I've got a sense of it. We'll see. But in the meantime, I'm also playing Earthbound. So I'm playing another old JRPG that way. So people can check that out.
And you have Pokemon or Pikachu, right?
I have Let's Go Pikachu, Pick up whichever one. I don't think it matters. Feel free.
Well,
whichever you want. If you really want the Pikachu, I understand.
Might hook us, and maybe we'll want to trade. Eevee is intriguing to me because I think she evolves or he evolves into different things, I think is what I heard.
Oh, so, I don't know anything about Eevee. You can get Eevee apparently in Red and Blue as well. So
I got her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I don't think I did it. Yeah.
It. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. Well, so we've got a couple of emails. We didn't have any reviews this week. We do love to see those via the podcast app. But you can also send us feedback via devgameclub@gmail.com. And you have one real short one here from Raymond. Why don't you go ahead?
Subject from Raymond is question about Pokemon Red. Hi, Brett and Tim. Do you think playing Pokemon when it came out would have affected how you thought about game design engineering? Regards, Raymond. What do you think, Brett?
So I'd like to say yes. But I will say that I had not yet matured enough in my engineering approach. So if I had played it around the time I started in the industry, which was a few years after this game actually came out, I was at the point where it's like, well, I'm doing gameplay programming. The last thing I want to think about is the hardware. Just let me, write my code, have it run on everything. I don't want to think about it. And it was not for a while after that I actually had to start thinking about hardware constraints. And in fact, if you go back and track down the game developer postmortem of Starfighter, I think one of the negative lessons that we learned was, we had a serious case of PCitis and had lots of performance issues, especially around like level loading and things like that, because we were so blind to the hardware strengths. And it made optimizing those games pretty tricky. And I'd like to say I would have, but I'm just purely honestly, it probably wouldn't have for me because I probably wouldn't have dug into like, what's the hardware this is running on? I would have looked at it and been like, oh, okay, I see what this thing is doing gameplay wise. Like, oh, it's this fairly simple system. And I don't think I would have understood the constraints. So my answer is, I wish it would have, but it probably wouldn't have, just because of where I was as an engineer at the time. How about you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that's a good answer, because I think, in all honesty, that's probably I have a similar answer in sort of having the full realization that maybe I'm having now. So I'm maybe a little bit wiser about that. However, two things might have happened. So I think the simple answer to his question is probably yes, ultimately, from a design perspective. But I don't know if I would fully have grokked it. But two things would have happened. One, probably I could have probably become demoralized as a designer by the amazing amount of design that's in this little cart, based on, all the challenges that we had making the things that we were doing at the time. But two, I definitely personally, I think everyone's this way, but I definitely get influenced by stuff I play, and I definitely would have been inspired by this too, because I think it's a pretty profound design. And maybe it sounds silly to some to say that, but I think because it's been around for so long, it's maybe kind of a known thing. But if I think back, if I had played this when it had come out, and how much I would have been impressed by it then, even if I wouldn't have fully understood why I was impressed, I think it definitely would have driven me to think differently about things. So yeah, I kind of regret that, but I'm glad at least
getting to it now. Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. I mean, I look back at some of the gaps, and I've been filling them through the years, and this is definitely hardware that I never really even thought about before. And because I had one, and it just was like, it's a simple little system, but never really thought about, okay, it's a simple little system, but it does a lot. And how are they doing all of that? And I mean, probably any time in the last decade, I might have looked at it and dug into it a little bit more, but before that, probably not. So just because of where I was in terms of what I had to concern myself with. There's a lot to engineering for a big video game. So it's, you don't always have time to think about everything. You kind of have to focus on what's right in front of you. And it's only over time that you kind of broaden that perspective, I think. So anyway, I'll take this second email, and then we'll call it a night. The subject here is most huggable monster, from Esther Olson. Brett and Tim, thanks for answering my question on the most recent show. I have two questions for you this week. Firstly, out of the Pokemon you've encountered so far, which one would you most like to give a hug? Wigglytuff is extremely huggable, although Tim's particular one may be less so on account of the risk of electric shock. Snorlax could be the ultimate hugger, but I wouldn't want to hug one unless it was awake. Secondly, a question for Tim. Do you imagine Bulbasaur enjoys belly rubs more, or would it prefer to be scratched behind the ears? Regards, Esther. So I'll throw that one over to you.
I mean, even though my Wigglytuff is in a wacky state, definitely. I think that's probably why I focused on Wigglytuff and kept it around, because it's so adorable. And again, I thought it was sort of this weird irony that I was turning it into this this very cute Frankenstein's monster, with all these different abilities. But it's just adorable, for sure. I don't know why, but Snorlax kind of scares me now. It's this weird, creepy, sleeping, very hard to beat, monster. And I think definitely on the belly for Bulbasaur.
Definitely on the belly. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I really like the Slowpoke. Looked pretty cuddly.
I think that thing is creeping me out.
Well, its face is a little creepy.
The eyes are like,
wide
that
open.
Thing is gonna kill me.
It's gonna kill
in my
you.
Sleep.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's. I don't know. It's what do I have no idea. I mean,
you became a bit of a bird person apparently, and right, like you.
Well, I had a lot of them, but that was more just I came across them at the right time. The Drowsy also looked pretty comfortable.
Drowsy's pretty fun.
Yeah, because it looked pretty soft and plush. So that might be a good fit as well. Yeah, yeah, exactly, and exactly, kind of shaggy, that, and maybe it would, it would be like a big Muppet. You know, I could see that being kind of like lots of terry cloth bits.
Oh my gosh!
So
a Pokemon show that's like with Muppets instead of animated.
Oh yeah, I'd be down for that.
I'd be down. Somebody make that.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do with these mechanics. It's kind of extraordinary, and I see why it's lasted as long as it had. As it has.
Yeah. It's clear to me now. Why this has happened. Yeah. Why it's the biggest franchise ever.
Yeah. Well, and we have some questions that bear more on that we'll get to next time. We do have several other questions, but it is getting we're getting long and it's getting late for you. So we're gonna.
Oh my gosh, this one mail is enormous.
Yep. Exactly right.
Yeah, we'll do that next time.
And I trimmed it down a little bit, so it's even worse. So we'll cover that stuff next time.
We'll get to it.
Yep, we'll get to it.
We'll have some more time next time because it'll be a bonus episode.
Exactly. So we'll have more time. Get a lot of feedback. Thanks for those of you who wrote those in. As I mentioned, you can send those to devgameclub@gmail.com. You can, of course, find the podcast on Twitter at devgameclub, or you can find the co-host here at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
You can, of course, find the podcast at devgameclub.com, where we have all the show notes. Of course, those are also in your podcast feed. And you can find me streaming basically every day these days at twitch.tv/Brett Douville. I also blog occasionally at brettdouville.com. Thanks so much for joining us this week, and good night.
Good night.
I believe you mean sounds good.
I know. I just said it. I just blurted it out. It was sorry.